When we talk about the Mexican Revolution, it sounds simple. One big fight, one big idea. But it was far messier than that. It was a chaotic struggle fought by many people for many reasons. Some wanted political change, others demanded land and justice. Imagine a giant family argument, but with cannons and horses. That was the revolution. It wasn't just about famous men like Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata. It was millions of ordinary people, including women, the soldaderas, who risked everything. The revolution was a storm of ideals and ambitions, tearing down the old world and forcing Mexico to rebuild itself. So as we dive in, remember, it was not one revolution, but many, all happening at once. Before the revolution, Porfirio Díaz ruled Mexico for more than 3 decades. A period that came to be known as the Porfiriato, an era Díaz himself described as one of order and progress. Under his iron grip, Mexico was transformed on the surface, but beneath the calm, deep tensions brewed. Díaz oversaw the construction of thousands of miles of railroads and the modernization of cities, bringing electricity, telegraphs, and grand new buildings. Foreign investors flocked to Mexico, drawn by promises of profit and stability. Yet this progress came at a steep cost for the majority of Mexicans. The wealth generated by these changes flowed almost exclusively to Díaz's inner circle and foreign businessmen. Ordinary people, meanwhile, saw their land taken and their livelihoods destroyed, forced to work as laborers on what had once been their own fields. Communal ejido lands, the backbone of rural life, were seized and privatized. Millions of farmers lost everything, becoming trapped in cycles of debt and poverty as they toiled for powerful landowners on vast haciendas. Any resistance was swiftly and brutally crushed. The peace Díaz promised was enforced by the army and the feared rurales police, who patrolled the countryside and silenced dissent with violence and intimidation. For most Mexicans, daily life grew harsher. Traditional ways of living were uprooted, families struggled to survive, and a sense of injustice and anger simmered just below the surface, waiting for release. By 1910, Mexico was a nation rich in natural resources, its mines, oil fields, and markets bustling with activity. But its people remained desperately poor, their hopes for justice and dignity crushed by a system that favored the few over the many. The country looked modern and prosperous on the outside, with gleaming infrastructure and busy streets. But beneath this facade, the engine of society was straining, ready to burst from the pressure. The peace of Porfirio Díaz was in truth the peace of the graveyard, a silence maintained by fear, not by justice or harmony. All it needed was a single spark to ignite the revolution that would change Mexico forever. When the revolution exploded, it wasn't one group with one demand, it was a stadium of angry voices. In the south, campesinos led by Emiliano Zapata fought for land and justice, Tierra y Libertad. In the north, Pancho Villa's ranchers, miners, and cowboys wanted to topple the old bosses and create new opportunities. Urban workers in factories and oil fields demanded better pay, the right to organize, and social rights. Middle-class liberals and intellectuals, led by Francisco Madero, wanted democracy and fair elections. Each group had its own vision for Mexico's future. Zapata's followers wanted land returned. Villa's men wanted power for the common man. Workers wanted rights and dignity. Madero wanted to fix the system, not destroy it. The revolution was a fire with many sparks. The Mexican Revolution, a turning point in the nation's history, began with an election in 1910. This was not just any election. It was a moment that would ignite a movement and change the fate of millions. Porfirio Díaz, the long-standing dictator, hinted at the possibility of democracy, perhaps never expecting anyone to challenge his rule. But Francisco Madero, a passionate reformer, took him at his word and dared to believe in real change. Madero ran for president, inspiring hope and drawing huge crowds eager for a new era. But Díaz, unwilling to relinquish power, had Madero jailed and rigged the vote, crushing the people's hopes for a peaceful transition. Refusing to give up, Madero escaped from prison and issued the Plan of San Luis Potosí. This bold document called for rebellion, urging Mexicans everywhere to rise up against tyranny and fight for their rights. At first, the calls seemed to go unanswered, but soon, legendary figures like Pancho Villa in the north and Emiliano Zapata in the south took up arms, rallying their followers and breathing life into the revolution. The rebellion spread rapidly across the country. Díaz's once mighty army crumbled under the pressure, and by May 1911, Díaz was forced to resign and flee the country, ending decades of dictatorship. Madero became president, stepping into a role filled with hope and expectation. But he soon discovered that removing a dictator was far easier than uniting a nation deeply divided by class, region, and ambition. Zapata, feeling betrayed by Madero's slow and cautious reforms, issued the Plan of Ayala. He vowed to keep fighting for land and justice, refusing to accept empty promises while his people suffered. The revolution split in two, one side fighting for political change, the other for deep social transformation. The dream of unity began to unravel. Madero wanted peace and stability, hoping to heal the nation's wounds. But Zapata and his followers demanded true justice, land, and dignity for the rural poor. The fight was no longer just against a dictator. It had become a struggle over the very soul and future of Mexico, with the nation's destiny hanging in the balance. The revolution turned inward, as former allies became rivals, and revolutionaries found themselves at odds over what kind of country they wanted to build. The struggle for land and justice was far from over. For many, the revolution's promises remained unfulfilled, and the fight for equality and rights continued in the countryside. The revolution's true battle had just begun, a battle not only for power, but for the heart and future of Mexico itself. Madero's presidency plunged Mexico into chaos. He tried to please everyone and satisfied no one. Old elites hated his reforms. Radicals like Zapata thought he wasn't radical enough. The US saw him as weak. In 1913, General Victoriano Huerta, with US support, betrayed and murdered Madero during the Decena Tragica. Huerta seized power, hoping to restore dictatorship, but instead ignited a bloodier civil war. Revolutionaries united briefly huerta Carranza, Villa, Obregón in the north, and Zapata in the south. After brutal fighting, Huerta's regime collapsed in 1914, and the revolutionaries entered Mexico City. But unity vanished. Carranza claimed leadership, but Villa and Zapata distrusted him. Attempts to form a new government failed, and the revolution turned into a war among the victors. The fight for Mexico's soul was far from over. The revolution's next phase was a brutal clash between Carranza and Obregón's constitutionalists and the conventionists of Villa and Zapata. Villa's northern army fought with cavalry and modern tactics, using railroads and artillery for massive battles. Zapata's southern forces fought guerrilla style, defending villages and ambushing enemies rooted in the land. The war was devastating. New technology made battles deadlier, and civilians suffered most. The Battle of Celaya in 1915 was decisive. Obregón's trench warfare shattered Villa's cavalry. Villa's power broke, and Obregón lost an arm but won the war. Cities changed hands, food supplies collapsed, and millions became refugees. The revolution's cost was staggering, over 1 million dead from combat, famine, and disease. The dream of a new nation came at a brutal price. The revolution was changing Mexico, but at a terrible human cost. Behind the battles, ordinary people, especially women, kept the revolution alive. The soldaderas cooked, carried supplies, cared for the wounded, and sometimes fought as soldiers and spies. Women like Petra Herrera led troops, proving courage knows no gender. The revolution's music, especially corridos, told stories of heroes and struggles, uniting people in song. Songs like La Adelita and La Cucaracha became anthems, spreading news and hope. The revolution also sparked a cultural renaissance. Muralists like Diego Rivera painted Mexico's struggles on public walls. The revolution was destructive, but it also inspired creativity and a new national identity. It forced Mexico to rediscover its roots and imagine a future shaped by its people. By 1917, the bloodiest fighting of the Mexican Revolution was finally coming to an end. The country was exhausted, scarred by years of conflict, and desperate for a new beginning. Venustiano Carranza, one of the revolution's key leaders, called for a new constitution to unite the nation and address the demands of the people. But when the Constitutional Convention gathered, the delegates went much further than Carranza had anticipated. Many of the delegates were young, idealistic, and determined to create real lasting change. Their debates were passionate and intense, and their vision resulted in the Progressive Constitution of 1917, a document that would become one of the most advanced of its time. Article 27 was revolutionary. It reclaimed land and natural resources for the nation, laying the groundwork for land reform. This was the legal realization of Emiliano Zapata's dream, land and liberty, finally written into law. Article 123 was equally groundbreaking. It protected workers' rights, guaranteeing the 8-hour workday, the right to form unions, and fair wages. For the first time, Mexican laborers had legal protections that recognized their dignity and power. Article 3 established free, secular public education for all. This was a bold step toward building a more equal society, giving every child the chance to learn and grow regardless of their background. But writing these laws was only the first step. Enforcing them proved to be much harder, as old power structures resisted change and new challenges emerged. Change came slowly, and violence continued to erupt across the country. The dream of a peaceful, just Mexico remained elusive for many years. Tragedy struck the revolution's leaders. Zapata was assassinated in 1919, Carranza in 1920, and Pancho in 1923. Their deaths marked the end of an era, but their ideals lived on. True land reform would not arrive until the 1930s, under President Lázaro Cárdenas, who finally implemented the promises of the Constitution and redistributed land to millions of peasants. The revolution destroyed the old order and created a new political system, but deep poverty and inequality persisted. The struggle for justice was far from over. Was the revolution a success or a failure? The answer is complicated. It brought hope and change, but also disappointment and new challenges. Yet, the revolution gave Mexico a new sense of identity and a powerful legacy, a tradition of fighting for justice, equality, and national pride. Its story is unfinished. The revolution remains a constant reminder of the ongoing fight for a better, fairer nation, inspiring new generations to demand change. Even today, the echoes of the revolution still shape Mexico's politics, society, and dreams for the future.